My Lai Massacre. On March 16, 1968, the concept of following orders hit a glitch that cost 504 lives. This wasn't a battle, it was a psychological collapse. Charlie Company, led by Captain Ernest Medina and Lieutenant William Calley, entered the hamlet of Son Mai, marked on their maps as Pinkville. The intelligence was wrong. They were told the village would be full of the 48th Viet Cong Battalion. It wasn't. It was full of breakfast. Families eating rice. But the psychological conditioning of the previous weeks, where the unit had lost men to invisible snipers and booby traps, had snapped something fundamental in the chain of command. The order was vague: clean the village. In the heat of a guerrilla war, clean became a euphemism for erase. When the shooting started, it wasn't a firefight, it was an execution line. Calley ordered his men to push villagers into a ditch. When a soldier refused, Calley grabbed a weapon and started firing himself. The odd why here isn't just the violence, it's the contagion of it. Men who are writing letters home to their moms on Tuesday were bayoneting infants on Saturday. This is the obedience to authority paradox, the Milgram experiment played out with live ammunition. The only reason we know the full scale is because of a glitch in the loyalty matrix. Warrant Officer Hugh Thompson, Jr. He wasn't on the ground, he was in a helicopter above it. Seeing the carnage, he didn't join in. He landed his bird between the U.S. troops and the surviving civilians and ordered his gunner to fire on the Americans if they attacked the civilians. It's one of the only documented cases of a U.S. soldier threatening to kill U.S. soldiers to stop a war crime while it was happening. The aftermath was a masterclass in cover-up. The official report said 128 Viet Cong were killed and 3 weapons captured. Do the math. That ratio alone should have triggered alarms. It took investigative journalist Seymour Hersh to break the story, proving that the real war crime often isn't the shooting, it's the paperwork that hides it. The Haditha Massacre. Fast forward to November 19, 2005, Iraq. A roadside bomb hits a Humvee. This is the trigger event. In war, adrenaline usually has a flush-out period. At Haditha, it didn't. Kilo Company, 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines, led by Staff Sergeant Frank Wuterich, didn't secure the perimeter. They went hunting. But they weren't hunting insurgents, they were hunting catharsis. They stopped a white taxi, 5 men inside, students. They were ordered out and shot dead in the street. But the rage wasn't spent. The Marines moved into the nearby houses. This is where the narrative of collateral damage falls apart. You don't clear a room with a grenade and then shoot a 76-year-old grandfather in a wheelchair in the head at close range as a tactical necessity. That's an execution. Inside the houses, they killed 19 more people. Women shielding babies, children in pajamas. The official press release the next day, a masterpiece of fiction. 15 civilians killed by roadside bomb. It was a lie that survived until a journalism student turned over a videotape from an Iraqi human rights worker. The video showed the bullet holes were in the walls, not from a bomb blast. The odd why is the legal black hole that followed. Years of trials, millions in legal fees. Result? Wuterich pleaded guilty to negligent dereliction of duty. No jail time. The lesson taught was dangerous. If you delay the trial long enough, the memory of the crime fades faster than the evidence. Pacification of Samar. Go back to 1901, the Philippine-American War. This is the origin story of the body count metric. General Jacob H. Smith, a man who looked like a cartoon villain and acted like one, gave an order that sounds fake but is recorded in history books. He told Major Littleton Waller, "I want no prisoners. I wish you to kill and burn. The more you kill and burn, the better it will please me." When asked for an age limit, Smith didn't say military age males. He said everyone capable of bearing arms. He defined that as anyone over 10 years old. 10! This wasn't combat, it was a geography project. He wanted to turn the island of Samar into a howling wilderness. The context was revenge for the Balanga massacre, where Filipinos surprised U.S. troops. But the retaliation was asymmetrical. U.S. troops burned food stores, slaughtered livestock, and executed civilians to induce famine. It was a scorched earth policy that effectively tried to delete a population to pacify a region. Smith was eventually court-martialed. His punishment? He was admonished and retired. Not fired, retired. He essentially got a stern talking to for ordering the genocide of 10-year-olds. Nisour Square, September 16, 2007, Baghdad. This wasn't the army. This was Blackwater, mercenaries with a corporate logo. The distinction is critical because it blurred the legal lines of warfare. A Raven 23 convoy entered Nisour Square and stopped traffic. A Kia sedan didn't stop fast enough. The reason? It was a chaotic traffic circle, not an ambush. The Blackwater snipers opened up. They used heavy machine guns and grenade launchers on commuters. A mother and her son in the Kia were vaporized. As the crowd panicked and tried to flee, the contractors treated the flight as aggression. They killed 17 people, 20 wounded. The contractors later claimed they were engaged by small arms fire. The FBI investigation found that to be a lie. There were no insurgent bullets found on the scene, just Blackwater brass. The legal glitch here is the pardon power. 4 guards were convicted. 1 got life. It seemed like justice finally caught up to the private sector. Then, in December 2020, President Trump issued full pardons. It sent a bizarre message to the world. War crimes are illegal unless you have the right friends. It shattered the illusion that private contractors are accountable to the same laws as the soldiers they fight beside. Abu Ghraib, 2003. This wasn't about killing. It was about breaking. Abu Ghraib prison became a laboratory for the dark side of human psychology. The photos that leaked didn't show interrogation. They showed sport. Piles of naked bodies, men on leashes, the now infamous hooded figure on the box with wires. The odd why is how mundane it all looked. The soldiers in the photos, Lindy England, Charles Craner, were giving thumbs up, smiling like they were at a fishing trip. This is the banality of evil. They weren't monsters in the dark. They were bored kids in a dungeon, authorized by a vague directive to soften up detainees for intelligence. The torture memos written by lawyers back in D.C. had redefined pain. They argued that unless the pain was equivalent to organ failure or death, it wasn't torture. It was enhanced interrogation. This legal gymnastics trickled down to the dungeon as do whatever you want. The result was a PR nuclear bomb that did more to recruit insurgents than any ideological speech ever could. We created the enemy we were fighting by treating them like animals. Operation Speedy Express. The Mekong Delta, late 1968. General Julian Ewell, known as the Butcher of the Delta, wanted numbers. The metric for success in Vietnam was the body count. Ewell wanted the high score. Operation Speedy Express was his method. The stats tell the story. The U.S. 9th Infantry Division reported 10,899 enemy killed, but they only recovered 748 weapons. That's a ratio of 14.5 dead people for every 1 gun found. In warfare, that's statistically impossible, unless you're counting farmers, water buffalo, and grandmothers as enemy combatants. They used free fire zones, a designated area where anything that moved was considered a target. If you ran, you were Viet Cong. If you stood still, you were disciplined Viet Cong. Helicopter gunships would essentially hunt people in rice paddies. It was industrialized slaughter driven by a management style that prioritized spreadsheets over reality. The Army Inspector General later estimated 5,000 to 7,000 of the dead were civilians. Ewell wasn't demoted, he was promoted. No gun re. July 1950, the Korean War. The fear was infiltration. U.S. commanders believed North Korean troops were disguising themselves as refugees. The solution? Stop the refugees by any means necessary. At No-Gun-ri, a group of South Korean refugees was forced onto a railroad track. When they tried to move, they were strafed by U.S. aircraft. Survivors who scrambled under a concrete bridge were then pinned down by the 7th Cavalry Regiment. For 3 days, the refugees were trapped. Soldiers fired into the tunnels. Women, children, old men. The odd why here is the memory hole. For 50 years, the U.S. denied it happened. Survivors were dismissed as communist sympathizers or liars. It wasn't until the Associated Press dug up declassified documents in 1999 that the truth came out. Orders like fire on everyone trying to cross lines and treat all refugees as enemy were found in the archives. It was a massacre authorized by paranoia. Sand Creek, November 29, 1864, Colorado Territory. This is the definition of betrayal. Chief Black Kettle of the Cheyenne had done everything right. He signed the treaty. He moved his people where the U.S. Army told him to go. He flew an American flag over his lodge with a white flag tied beneath it explicitly to show he was peaceful. Colonel John Chivington, a Methodist pastor turned militia leader, didn't care. He led the 3rd Colorado Cavalry, a unit of 90-day volunteers looking for a fight before their enlistment ended, into the camp at dawn. It wasn't a battle. Most of the men were out hunting. Chivington's men slaughtered 230 people, mostly women and children, but they didn't just kill them, they mutilated them. They took scalps, fingers, and private parts as trophies to display in Denver theaters. It was so horrific that even the hardened U.S. Army officers of the Civil War were disgusted. Captain Silas Saul, who refused to fire his weapon and testified against Chivington, was later assassinated in Denver. A hero murdered for having a conscience. The Philippines concentration camps. We associate concentration camps with WW2, but the U.S. utilized the reconcentration policy in the Philippines in 1901. General J. Franklin Bell in Batangas Province decided that to catch the fish, gorillas, you have to drain the sea, the people. He ordered the entire rural population into designated zones. Anyone outside the zones after a certain date would be shot. Inside the zones? Hell! Overcrowding, no sanitation, and practically no food. It was a petri dish for cholera and malaria. The odd why is the zone of death logic. The camps weren't death camps by design, like gas chambers. They were death camps by negligence. They concentrated people and then forgot to feed them. Over 8,300 people died in the Batangas zones alone. The U.S. press called it benevolent assimilation. The reality was a mortality rate higher than some battles. Wounded Knee, December 29, 1890. The Lakota ghost dance movement was scaring the federal government. It was a spiritual revival, but the Army saw it as an uprising. The 7th Cavalry intercepted a band of Minneconjou Lakota at Wounded Knee Creek. They were disarming the Lakota. A deaf man named Black Coyote didn't understand the command to give up his rifle. A scuffle ensued. A shot went off. The 7th Cavalry opened fire with Hotchkiss mountain guns, essentially rapid-fire cannons, shredding the teepees where the women and children were waiting. 300 Lakota died. But the real twist? The Army awarded 20 Medals of Honor for this battle. 20! For shooting fleeing women and children in the snow. To this day, those medals have not been rescinded. It stands as the most decorated massacre in U.S. history. It wasn't heroism. It was a Turkish shoot, rewarded with the nation's highest honor. The Maiwand District Murders. 2010, Afghanistan. This wasn't a tactical mistake. This was recreational murder. A group of U.S. soldiers from the 5th Stryker Brigade, led by Staff Sergeant Calvin Gibbs, formed what they literally called a kill team. They didn't wait for combat. They staged it. They would find a civilian, a farmer, a kid, toss a Russian grenade near the body, and claim self-defense. Then they took trophies, fingers, skulls, teeth. They took photos posing with the corpses like they were deer hunters. The odd why is the sport aspect. Gibbs collected off-the-books weapons, AK-47s, grenades, specifically to use as drop weapons to frame victims. It reveals a terrifying subculture where the rules of engagement are viewed not as laws, but as obstacles to be gamed. The photos that eventually leaked in Rolling Stone showed a complete detachment from humanity, soldiers smiling over the broken body of a 15-year-old boy named Gulmuddin. The Kandahar Massacre. March 11, 2012. One man, Staff Sergeant Robert Bales. This wasn't a squad, it was a solo mission of horror. Bales left his base at Camp Belembe in the middle of the night, heavily armed, and walked to a nearby village. He went house to house. He killed 16 civilians. 9 of them were children. He piled the bodies of his victims and set them on fire. He then returned to base, reportedly confessed, and turned himself in. The defense argued steroid psychosis and traumatic brain injury, but the prosecution pointed to the methodical nature of the act. He walked a mile to the village. He reloaded. He moved between houses. It shattered the hearts and minds strategy in Afghanistan overnight. It proved that to the locals, the heavily armed stranger in the night wasn't a protector. He was the boogeyman. The Biscari Massacre. July 14, 1943, Sicily. World War II is often called the Good War, but it had its shadows. After a tough firefight for the Biscari airfield, U.S. troops captured 70-plus Italian and German prisoners. They were surrendered, hands up. Sergeant Horace West was ordered to take a group of 37 prisoners to the rear. He didn't. He marched them off the road, borrowed a submachine gun, and told his men to turn around if they didn't want to see it. He gunned them all down. Why? He later claimed General George Patton's speech about killers and no prisoners inspired him. Later that same day, Captain John Compton ordered the execution of another 36 prisoners. The odd why is the double standard. West was convicted, then quietly reinstated a year later. Compton was acquitted because he claimed he was following orders from the chaotic heat of the battle. It showed that in the confusion of World War II, the line between clearing a trench and murder was often drawn in disappearing ink. The Amiria shelter bombing. February 13, 1991. The Gulf War. The U.S. Air Force targeted a bunker in Baghdad, public shelter number 25. Intelligence said it was a military command center. They were wrong. It was a civilian air raid shelter. 2 laser-guided GBU-27 bunker buster smart bombs hit the ventilation shaft. The engineering was perfect. The target selection was catastrophic. The bombs penetrated the reinforced concrete and detonated inside. The heat was so intense it incinerated over 400 civilians instantly. The fire suppression system boiled the water in the tanks, scalding those who weren't burned. The U.S. maintained it was a legitimate military target that was also being used by civilians, human shields. But independent journalists found no evidence of military hardware. It stands as a grim reminder that smart bombs are only as smart as the person circling the map. You can have the most precise weapon in human history, but if the coordinates are for a room full of families, it's just precise mass murder. Conclusion? There is no conclusion. History doesn't wrap up in a neat bow. These 15 events aren't anomalies. They are the friction points where the machine of war grinds up the morality of peace. If we don't look at them, really look at the gore, the paperwork, the cover-ups, we are guaranteed to print new medals for the next Wounded Knee.